Hello and welcome to a very special video from Chrono24 in New York City. I'm Thomas and today we have none other than John Reardon with us today. John has had an illustrious decades-long career in the watch industry, starting his auction career at Sotheby's in New York, moving to the Henry Stern Watch Agency for a decade, and then going to Christie's as the international head of watches. In 2019, John launched his own venture, Collectability, as a selling platform and foremost an educational resource for all things Patek Philippe. John, it's an absolute pleasure to have you today, and I very much look forward to our conversation.
Thomas, it is an honor to be here with you today at Chrono24. I look forward to digging into all things Patek Philippe, discussing past, present, and future. And I have some interesting watches to show you, but we're gonna have to get to that later.
Let's do it. Let's dive right in, shall we? Well, we have a lot of goodies here, but let's start with something as simple as a quick wrist check. What are you wearing today?
Today I am wearing, and people give me a tough time for this before the reveal.
Okay.
They say, John, you can have all these great watches, but you wear a quartz Patek Philippe Aquanaut.
Okay.
And the reference 5064A has been near and dear to my heart for the simple reason. This was my first Patek Philippe. And while I was working at the Henry Stern Watch Agency, I was on the road for 2 years, visiting almost all the retailers here in the States, wearing a Longines, a vintage Longines from the 1940s in stainless steel, a watch I still have in my collection. And I remember asking the president of Patek Philippe, I was like, can I at least have a loaner watch? Can I just have a Patek Philippe when I'm out there representing the brand? And he said, no, that's not the tradition here at the Henry Stern Watch Agency. You have to earn it. So I was saving every penny to buy my first Patek Philippe. And at that point, the reference 5064 had a retail price of $5,350. This would have been 2002, 2003. They did give me a special accommodation, but it was still real money. And the day I had enough money to buy my first Patek Philippe, I jumped on it. The irony is, if I spent $800 more, I could have bought a 5065 Jumbo Aquanaut, but there it goes. So this piece, I'm a runner. It's gone with me 4 marathons so far. Wow. And hopefully another one this fall. And this watch is near and dear to my heart. It's my go-to watch. I pick up in the morning and put on my wrist. So that's the story of the watch on my wrist today.
So I want to take it back to the beginning, before Collectability, before Christie's, before Henry Stern, before Sotheby's. Where did watches begin with you? Where did, as a young boy, I know you collected baseball cards and things like that. Yes. Where did you get the watch bug to begin with?
I have to thank my brother-in-law. Well, he's now my brother-in-law. At that time, he was dating my sister. He was and is a watch collector, and he introduced me to the world of pocket watch collecting, specifically American pocket watch collecting, Elgins, Walthams, Hamiltons. And I was a young teen at the time, and I just thought this was the nerdiest guy on earth. I was like, it's all right, he's gonna marry my sister someday, but this watch thing is kind of weird. Little did I know that set me on my path, and to this day I thank him for that, because he introduced me to the concept and the community and the idea of watch collecting. And it started simply with pocket watches, and it grew from there. And I amazingly, coincidentally, and thankfully, grew up right next to the American Clock and Watch Museum in my hometown of Bristol, Connecticut. And one day I took my collection, it was like 2 or 3 pieces at the time, and went to the museum and met the curator, Stuart Mitchell. And he taught me about the watches, and eventually I kept going back to the museum, and I described as an apprentice. I learned clockmaking and some basic watchmaking going to the museum, and this was all through high school. And that's what really kicked this off for me. It was a very unexpected surprise to discover this world of horology that I wasn't even aware of.
And do you still have a lot of the early pieces from your initial collection? I know hearing a lot of other collectors, they say the first 10 pieces they bought were garbage. I think that's the same for me. Do you still have a lot of these early pieces, like the Longines, like the pocket watches?
I do. I have the Longines. I have some of the basic, some of the simple American pocket watches for sentimental reasons. They're keepers. They're not especially valuable, but for many collectors, I mean, these early stories, the mistakes that we make, these are the watches that we learn from and we keep throughout our collecting careers.
And for those watching who are getting into watch collecting or even have been in a long time, do you have any general notes of advice to, as someone who's been in the industry a long time, or just to help avoid some of those early mistakes that are super common?
Wow, I guess 3 rules. So I'm literally coming up with this off the cuffs. but number 1, we've heard it before and we'll hear it again, is buy quality. It doesn't matter if it's a $50 watch or a $5 million watch. Always buy quality, and that's first and foremost. The second thing, and I think people forget this often, is you need to know who you're buying from. And whether you're buying through a trusted platform, a dealer, an auction house, always just know who you're buying from, what piece you're buying, and knowing the exit strategy in case you ever needed to sell that piece. This is something so important that people forget as soon as they buy a watch. And the third, I really believe people should buy watches that don't chase trends, but really engage with your own story. If you're buying a watch to celebrate a birth of a child, a graduation, or another important life event, that's part of your story and that's part of your watch. And I think that is very key, and people are forgetting that. Early on in my career, back in the 90s, the most common watch question was, well, how does it look on the wrist? How does it feel and how does it function? Today, everyone's asking, well, how much? What's it going to be worth tomorrow? And is it a good investment? I cringe at that question. That's not the reason to buy watches. So tell your own story is my third bit of advice.
And we'll definitely get to trends later, because I do want to dive in on that and get your perspective. Jumping back to your personal collection, I am curious, have any other non-Patek brands made it in there or stuck around? Or what are your thoughts on that as you've really honed in on one brand over time?
Wow. In terms of non-Patek Philippe, I'm very focused right now, well, actually over the last 10 years, in late 17th century horology, English long case clocks specifically. So the names from that period of time may not be as recognizable today. The idea of brands didn't matter. I mean, these were the independent makers of the day. People celebrate independent makers today who are making 10s, 20s, hundreds of watches, which I respect. But these independent makers from the 17th century might have made 10 pieces in their life, maybe 20 if they were fortunate. So it's just a different psychology, and they are very underappreciated today. I mean, people aren't really looking for long case clocks. So I see it's great horological value. It has nothing to do with investment. It's just to do with pleasure. And I consider the ritual of winding these clocks on Sunday night with my kids is kind of the heartbeat of the home. And it's just it's a beautiful thing to have in my personal collection. I frankly keep it quite private. I haven't really discussed that in the past.
And speaking of underappreciated timepieces, I know you have quite a penchant for pocket watches and clocks and things like that. Can you walk us through that a little bit?
Sure. I've always been a fan of pocket watches ever since my horological journey began. And the reasons are simple. I find that when you hold a pocket watch in your hand, something, just having like a quarter pound of gold in your hand it's very satisfying, it's very tangible. Even with a minute repeater, the sound that resonates from one of these cases is much better than what you would hear from much smaller, much later versions made in wristwatch form. So pocket watches represent great value today because the market isn't the same. But let's go back to like the 1960s, 70s, and 80s of collecting that we see in the auction world, for example. It was all about pocket watches. It was all about buying the best pocket watches from the 17th, 18th, and 19th century, even the early 20th century. That was all replaced in the late 1980s when wristwatches really came to the forefront of the collecting circles. But for me, pocket watches are near and dear to my heart. And incredibly, I don't know why, but thanks to this pandemic over the last year plus, pocket watches have had a resurgence. I've never seen so much interest in pocket watches as in recent months. And when we're seeing prices go up at auction, we're seeing pocket watches trading at record prices. And it's kind of refreshing to see this return to we'll call the traditional values of pocket watches coming back.
Yeah, any guess as to why that's the case? It seems unexpected, for sure.
It is. At first, I thought it was the gold bug mentality, where people were, things were not looking so good, trying to store away wealth under their mattress, as they say, and a gold pocket watch represents that. The second, with a lot of, with wristwatches, we're seeing a lot of refinishing, we're seeing cases detailed. The vintage watch collecting world is full of shark-infested waters. But with pocket watches, there's a simple purity to them that if an enamel dial cracks, it's 120 years old, you're not gonna be able to restore it. You're not gonna be able to fool anyone. There's obvious signs when a pocket watch has been changed over time. Same with cases. I'm not seeing anyone like laser detailing pocket watch cases from the 1880s. So this like purity of form, design, horology, but also this complete lack of attention on the segment as a whole leads to more, I guess, incredible condition pieces. And if you buy for condition, sometimes it's more fun buying something 150 years old that's been untouched than something 10 years old that's been refinished.
And just kind of segueing into your career a little bit, your auction career started at Sotheby's, and there was a particular pocket watch there that really made a mark, let's say. Can you walk us through that a little bit?
Oh, sure. Thanks to Darren Schnipper, who is she's the chairman of Sotheby's Watches today. She was the one that recruited me as soon as I finished school, and I'll never forget that, and I'm really appreciative of it. And I'm also very appreciative that she's the one that locked down the consignment originally of the Henry Graves Super Complication, the most complicated watch ever made up until 1989, when it was replaced by the Caliber 89. And this consignment came from the Rockford Time Museum in Rockford, Illinois, by the ultimate uber collector of the 20th century, Seth Atwood. And Darren brought in this watch for consignment, and the estimate we gave was $3 to $5 million originally. That price even seemed beyond believable in
at the
late
time, for sure.
Yeah. $3 to $5 million for a watch. And then the day of the auction arrived, December 2nd, 1999, a date I'll never forget. And everybody was there in the watch world of the late 20th century. And I was watching very carefully what Patek Philippe was doing. I was watching what other significant collectors were doing. And of note, one particular collector who ended up being the buyer of the Henry Graves Super Complication, he was on the phone and ended up buying it for $11 million. He's since passed. The story is brilliantly told in Stacy Perman's book, A Grand Complication, which I encourage everyone to read to really understand the heart of a collector, why collectors do what they do, and sometimes they're rational, sometimes brilliant, sometimes a combination of both. And that's the story from the beginning of the Henry Graves Super Complication.
And diving into your auction career a little bit more, you of course started at Sotheby's and then went to Henry Stern Watch Agency, and then you went back to Christie's. Can you tell us a little bit about the thought process there?
Yeah, maybe that was a bout of insanity, because I fully intended on staying at Henry Stern Watch Agency my whole life. The initiation or the process or even the interview experience of getting into Patek Philippe is a story in itself. And once I had that job and started in early 2001, I really believed I died and went to horological heaven. I really enjoyed those 10 years. Yet I had a problem, and my problem was my addiction and obsession with vintage Patek Philippe. My job was specifically to sell modern watches, to distribute throughout the US all of these pieces. and I miss vintage. And I found I'd spend a lot of time with my former colleague, David Jarrett, who headed up the Patek Philippe service department, looking at the vintage watches coming into service. And that's where my heart was. And that's what ultimately brought me back to the auction world is I missed working on a daily basis with these early pieces.
And one thing I know from listening to other interviews and things with you is your take on the auction world and how it's very seller oriented. And I just want to get your thoughts on, especially now that you've launched Collectability, how your approach with that differs from, say, a Christie's or a Sotheby's or any other auction house there.
That's true. It's incredible. Throughout most of my auction career, I didn't recognize how the legal due diligence leaned towards the seller, because I always think about your own reputation at the end of the day. So it's always balancing between buyer and seller. I think the auction world is growing very quickly. The numbers are getting much bigger. I mean, it's a $150 million ballpark industry of what we're seeing show up at auction. And it certainly leans towards the seller. And we see a lot of buyers spending a lot of money being advised by auction specialists. So I struggled with this. It's a balance. I think anyone who sells watches feels it's like, yes, you're there to sell a watch. Yes, you're there to make a fair profit. And yes, the buyer hopefully is buying the watch of their dreams. And you're trying to find this balance as the merchant in between. Collectability embodies my personal vision and my personal values of how that works and how it should work. And that is first and foremost education. The whole vision of collectability is giving an education of all things Patek Philippe. And as an educated consumer, as we've seen before, is the smartest consumer and makes the best decisions at the end of the day. And it's more fun working with people who truly know what truly have the drive to understand and learn more about the watches they're buying. And same with the sellers need to be educated too. So I'm very transparent with what I'm buying, what I'm selling. The condition reports are very key. The provenance is very important. What's been done to the watch is very key. So collectability is all about giving those tools to both buyers and sellers to make intelligent decisions. And that has been, I think, a key to collectability's early success. And through important selling platforms such as Chrono24, I'm able to reach a larger audience to educate people about what they're buying and selling, and these little jewels in their collection that they really understand every last component of them.
And one thing I want to get your perspective on as someone who's been in the industry for a long time in different roles is collector mentality. And especially with the rise of social media and more information and more sites like Collectability, how have you seen the attitudes change towards watch collecting, and how have the phone calls and emails changed over the years, for example?
It's a great question. And we don't have to go back too far in time. Even 20 years ago, the whole idea of an online digital community of watch collectors didn't really exist. We had Time Zone, which was fascinating to read people's comments, but it was a very small group of hardcore collector types.
And it was a membership based.
Originally, yes, yeah. Before then, it opened up to the public, but at first you had to literally be a member to even see these comments. So it didn't open it up to the world, but it was the first taste of what was coming our way. Thanks to very cautiously, Instagram and even Facebook, we have a much wider dialogue, and that's mostly healthy for what we do. A lot of people share a lot of information, but once again, we're in shark-infested waters because I see personally with social media a lot of market manipulation. Maybe that's a strong term. There's everyone selling something to someone at all times, and as long as you go into the waters aware of that, you're gonna be fine. But I see a lot of people are jumping into trends that may or may not be real, but thanks to social media, people can create trends out of nothing. And we might talk about this later, but the 5711 madness right now, the whole steel Nautilus craze. It is a social media driven tulip bulb crisis in the making. And I think 20 years from now, there'll be people researching this, of how group psychology is leading to these prices. Watches that you can buy today, the green dial 5711, well, if you can buy today,
Big if.
for $33,000, I hear now trading at $300,000. If you have the diamond version, those are selling for $600,000. If you have a Tiffany signature on it, the secondary market value is $1 million, apparently. So this is really scary numbers that we're talking about. These are the people that are calling and asking me, it's like, is this a good investment? And it's like, I don't even want to have those conversations with you. Because for $1 million, you could buy a lot of what you love. And buying something that's current production just because it has a special dial, to me, is not a viable answer.
Yeah, and a lot of what we have in here would certainly fall well below the price point of your run-of-the-mill 5711 today.
That's true.
I mean, what do you think? It's been interesting to watch the Stearns family's reaction to this as well.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, where do you think we go from here? Do you think there's a return to more of a focus on precious metal, more of the bread and butter Patek, precious metal, highly complicated pieces, or is this stainless steel Genta phase here to stay?
I think we're at the tail end of this, we'll call it the steel Genta mania, because it's not just Patek Philippe. I think we're going to see strong prices continue for quite some time, but there is going to be a story after this, and it's fun to predict what that will be. And one of the things I love doing with collectability is identifying and finding what could be the next best thing. I don't have a crystal ball. Your guess is as good as mine of what the next great watch will be.
I have no good guesses, by the way.
And it's fun to look. I mean, I'm just sharing my personal opinion, what I love. Okay, I love pocket watches. Okay, I love the Ellipse model, which I've had a lot of fun with in the past 2 years trying to promote it. I love Patek Philippe solar and desk clocks, which is a big part of my personal collection, because frankly, no one else wants to buy them. Mm-hmm. So I have a dozen of them that I appreciate, and I absolutely adore these, but they're not the next best thing, at least yet. So it's fun to guess, but I try, even in the business, to just to buy with a collector's heart. Everything that I have, that I sell, are pieces that I would love to keep in my collection if I could. I'd love to keep every last watch I have. But we're also a business, so that's not something that I can do. But I can put my fingerprints on each watch to share my passion and my knowledge and what I think could be a piece that more people should give attention to.
And I know from listening to interviews, you have kind of 4 different kinds of collectors that you identify. And I'm wondering, if you've seen that change over time, and if someone does call you up, we get these calls all the time, what's the next big thing? What should I invest in? Is there like a paradigm shift that you need to walk them through as far as a collector mentality, or how do those conversations go?
It's very common. I have collectors, we won't even call them collectors, we'll call them investors. They'll say, all right, I have $100,000, what should I buy? I have $1 million, what should I buy? And they're like looking for baskets. I feel all of a sudden I'm in the financial services industry. It's a very different thing. I try to find out through questions. You can learn a lot by listening why they're really buying, what their goals are, and what they're really trying to do. And the reason we all buy watches is out of emotion at the end of the day. It's a human connection to these mechanical works of art. And that's the most beautiful part about collecting watches. And that's at any price point, any brand, and every single reference. And if you just want to see proof of it, next time you're out to dinner with a group of collectors, and thank goodness we could finally do that again,
yes,
is just look at everyone's watch. Like you asked, and she said, can you tell me the story of your watch? And they're going to tell you a very human story, something that you'll learn more about that individual than in any other type of conversation that you could have. So at the end of the day, for the 4 different types of collectors that I loosely define in the collecting world, that's kind of encompasses all of them. And we're all a little bit of an accumulator. We're a little bit of an investor. There's a lot of the flippers out there, but the true collectors, which I think is the holy grail of where we all want to be, are people that are really buying for a reason. They're keeping their watches for a reason. And they're telling stories of each of their watches for very personal reasons.
And which of the four would you consider yourself between? What are your categories again?
So a collector, which we'll call like the mixture of all of them. There's flippers, people that they're buying and selling. There's the accumulators. These I find the most fascinating. These, I think there's like some TV shows where there's people like I'll have like a whole storage unit full of I don't know, lighters or baseball caps or like. There's people that just accumulate things.
It's a whole cabinet of curiosities.
Exactly, in obsessive ways. But in the watch world, we certainly have our share of people who collect watches and have hundreds, in some cases thousands of watches, and they just, they will never sell a piece until the day they die, sadly. I find the accumulators very interesting psychologically. So with all of the collector, I define as someone who's always trying to increase the horological value of their collection. They're trading up. Their collection is very fluid. It changes in many different ways. And that's what I would define myself, I guess, optimistically as a collector in the way that I curate collectability. Because I started off with just a small amount of watches, and now as the inventory grows, I'm able to balance it from time-only pieces to complicated pieces from 150 years ago to 10, 15 years ago. And it's fun to try to balance the inventory to reflect what I love, because it keeps it interesting, exciting for me. It also keeps the treasure hunt very much alive. Oh, that's the other one I forgot, the treasure hunters. Yes. Yeah. And one thing we've learned in the past year is the treasure hunting still continues even when the world is falling apart. And that's thanks to online platforms. I mean, there are, I guess, hundreds of thousands of us going on Chrono 24, digging and trying to find like the next big discovery digitally. And you can do that online just as much as in the past you could have gone to flea markets and to traveled around the world to find pieces. And it's fun to have these digital platforms where you could treasure hunt from your couch.
And it's especially helpful, I think, for thematic collectors. You and I both know Rani Manvani,
of course.
For example, is how would you describe his taste, for example?
He is the true collector, the very definition of a collector. I think all of us can hope to learn as much as he knows and to think the way he does and the way that he curates his personal collection. Because his collection is very focused on form. He loves the design. He also loves retailer signatures, yes. And he tries to combine these two in a way that I personally appreciate. And I'm so glad that this gentleman is sharing his passion and knowledge with the world, because I'm seeing more, we'll call them little Ronnies, coming up, who are trying to, even with, it doesn't matter how much money you spend, even with $5,000, even with $1,000, you could put together a wonderful collection with that same mentality as this gentleman that's doing it in the millions.
And would you encourage people to, if they do want to have a serious collection that they could bring to a dinner, basically, do you encourage more thematic-based collecting, or more just kind of like buy what you like?
You should always buy what you love and what you like, and also what life brings to you, because as a treasure hunter, you never know what you're going to see next. But I respect that. However, having a thematic-based collection makes it even more focused and more exciting. I mean, we've all spoken to collectors who get very frustrated that they're buying from all over the place, and they all of a sudden they have 100 watches, and they're like, oh, I don't know how to tell my story because I have too many pieces. Great problem to have. Yes. But if you go in, even from day one, and you focus your collection and you really try to tell your story, have a very strong reason why you're doing what you're doing, then it makes sense. So if your focus is pocket watches and you want to have a vertical of every type of complication imaginable, you're going to be very busy for the rest of your life putting that collection together. If you're a modern collector and you're attempting to put together every single time only made in the last 20 years from any particular brand, you're going to be very busy for the rest of your life, because there's always going to be some more releases. So there's something for everyone, but the theme I think is key to staying sane as a collector. Otherwise, there's just too much out there.
It's too many directions to go in all at once. And one thing I am curious about is someone, since you are a curator and run a business and an enthusiast as well, where is the line between John Reardon's personal collection and the collectability inventory?
Oh, it's a shame. The line has been blurred because it's all people, you're having a conversation with collectors and then you tell them about the one piece that you're never gonna sell. That's the watch that they want. It's almost 9 out of 10 times. I do have like my core collection that I don't share with the world, that I keep very quiet. I just shared my story of my 5135 white gold annual calendar. It's a piece that I sold and lost many years ago, and it amazingly came back into my life with the same strap and with the certificate of origin with my name on it. And I mean, this is the horological gods were smiling.
It's meant to be, yeah.
It was meant to be. And I swear that watch I will never sell unless I absolutely had to. I mean, at the end of the day, you know, we all have to make choices. But like my quartz aquanaut, actually, this is the one piece. This one's going to my grave with me, and fortunately, it's not that valuable relatively. But I absolutely love this piece. So there's certain pieces in my collection that I will never ever sell. But I do look at the watches in my inventory as also my collection, personally and business-wise. In these, I do sell, and just like a collector has to make choices to let go of pieces to buy more. That's the fun part of the collectability collection, we'll call it, is it's always evolving, it's always changing. I have so many regrets of pieces I've sold that have gone to many through Chrono 24 to new buyers that are very happy with their purchase, and I have seller's regret. I wish I could buy them back. In some cases, I do.
And I think your Aquanaut is a great example of a lot of the things we talked about today, where on the market, not the most valuable watch, but to you, it has such a history, especially looking back from where you are now. It's something I encourage a lot of people to consider when they are shopping for pieces.
Absolutely.
And one topic that gets thrown around a lot while we're in the topic of collecting is an exit watch. Do you think there's ever one where that would get you out of the game? Or is it just a never-ending hunt?
If I could trade every watch that I have for one piece, well, I still couldn't afford it. But the dream watches to me are the John Lennon 4th Series 2499. I mean, that to me is so American, so New York. It's such a piece that speaks to the heart of millions of us. That would be a piece that to have in my hands would be an ultimate dream. But it's not for sale, I understand. There are other pieces out there that I'm offered sometimes pieces that I couldn't even imagine to be able to inventory. Like one watch that's to me, like the holy grail of grails is the famous JB Champion, the platinum manual observatory watch. This was sold at Christie's years ago, and I would do anything to have my hands on that watch. So there are these grails that exist out there, but for all of us, I think at all levels, there's always the piece that you can't have. And that desire to want the watch that you can't have is what makes collecting so much fun.
Yes.
Here we have a selection of Patek Philippe watches that are indicative of the type of pieces that I inventory. But the dial is based on the 1930s dial that you can see at the Patek Philippe Museum in Geneva. And this is the famous sector dial.
We are also doing a $10,000 giveaway if you're worried about budget. Full details for that are in the description below. In the meantime, thanks for watching and enjoy your watches.